Hello all and welcome to Risk Out's webinar, Breaking the Chains, How Bankers Can Fight Human Trafficking. We are so excited to have you joining us here today. Now, before we do dive into today's webinar content, let's run through some quick housekeeping items. Risk Out will be sharing all of today's webinar resources in a follow-up email tomorrow morning, so be sure to keep an eye on your inbox. You can access all of today's webinar resources, including a copy of our slide deck, in the top right corner of your webinar interface. We also want this session to be as valuable for you as possible, so we encourage you to ask any questions that you may have throughout today's session for our Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. We'll also be running a few polls throughout today's session to better understand you all, our audience, so your participation is greatly appreciated. In case it's your first time joining us, Risk Out is a team of former bank examiners, BSA professionals, and fintech developers helping financial institutions grow and be more efficient and profitable. Through a full BSA, AML, and fraud suite, Risk Out's solutions increase revenue and decrease compliance costs and fraud losses by unlocking new deposit streams, automating compliance workflows, and catching fraudsters. If you're interested in learning more about how we help community banks and credit unions every day, or if you want to replace your existing BSA, AML, and fraud solution, visit riskout.com and get in touch. Valentine's Day is just around the corner and love is in the air. But unfortunately, so are romance scams, social engineering, and deepfake-enabled fraud. This February session, we will cover how modern romance scams are planned, executed, and monetized, from dark web forums to emotional manipulation inside your customers' and members' inboxes. Visit riskout.com to save your seat today, or click the link in the webinar chat now. Today's webinar is led by Chris Kinnefick, a U.S. investigator at Hope for Justice. Chris is a retired special agent from the United States Department of the Air Force, Office of Special Investigations, with 27 years of law enforcement experience. Chris started his career as a police officer in the Metropolitan Nashville, Tennessee Police Department, where he served as a patrol officer and a member of the Metropolitan Development Housing Authority Task Force. He became a special agent in February of 2002, where he served for 22 and a half years with the U.S. Secret Service, Department of Energy, Office of the Inspector General, and Office of Special Investigations. Currently, Chris serves as the U.S. investigator for Hope for Justice, an international nonprofit organization combating human trafficking. He is focused on dismantling human trafficking networks by uncovering their operations, identifying and locating trafficking victims, and fostering trust-based relationships that empower survivors to safely exit exploitation and reclaim their freedom. We are so excited to have Chris joining us here today. And without further ado, Chris, I'll throw it over to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and to dive into today's content. Take it away, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ethan. Thank you all for being here. I'm really grateful and glad to have this opportunity to be with you today. So yeah, again, Ethan, identified, I've been in law enforcement for 27 years and I actually just retired last year. I've been with Hope for Justice now for about a year. And so, my experience with trafficking started early on in my career when I was a police officer. Sadly, I had exposure and had dealt with it as a police officer as well as when I was with the U.S. Secret Service. My aspect of trafficking when I was with Energy, the Office of Inspector General, was more focused on labor trafficking, but that was interesting because it gave me a different aspect related to trafficking when it came to the labor projects that were being done. And then as far as with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, my exposure with trafficking was really more associated with the Army Air Force Exchange. That's basically like the Walmart for the military. And so we do a lot of overseas, had a lot of overseas investigations related to labor trafficking with that. And then with Hope for Justice over the past year, I've dealt a lot. We deal with both sex and labor trafficking, but predominantly my experience has been working with a lot of the sex trafficking survivors or victims and survivors. So anyway, I look forward to presenting this information to you. So just to give you a little heads up, so Hope for Justice, like again, is a nonprofit which we started back in 2008 out of the UK. And it is an international organization that's just focused on identifying victims of trafficking, supporting the survivors, and then, taking measures to help prevent exploitation of victims. So Hope for Justice, we have a U.S. presence here, and it's in 3 different locations where our corporate headquarters is in Nashville, Tennessee. And we also have a hub there, like a social support hub. And then in Charlotte, North Carolina, we have a social support hub as well. And we have 5 investigators. We're all retired law enforcement. And we each, of the 5, 2 of us cover the Southeast region, which covers Charlotte. We have 1 investigator who's my boss, is actually in Nashville. And then we have 2 investigators in Iowa. And in Iowa, we're actually trying to develop and enhance the social service support there. So, but that is our footprint here in the United States. Next, please. So you probably ask yourself, like, okay, nonprofits, there's a lot of them out there. What do you guys specifically do? So just really quickly, Hope for Justice, we're focused on outreach, number 1, right? We're looking to try to get as much outreach as we can to educate people on sex and labor trafficking, as well as with that outreach, we hope to work with law enforcement. We work with anyone that can help us identify victims of trafficking and then bring justice to them and help them. We also have, like I said, the investigators that work with the social support hubs to help support victims. And then also, as investigators, we develop the cases and the information that we get from survivors, and then we are able to collect that information as intelligence, and then we work with the appropriate law enforcement entity and then pass that information on to them. We also have focused on a little bit with the legislation and outreach when it comes to at the government level. Matter of fact, one of our operations director in Tennessee was actually there when the Take It Down Act was signed at the White House. So we definitely have a big footprint there as well, trying to give our insights and input as it relates to legislation and policy toward trafficking. Next slide, please. So I'm just to let everybody know, like the presentation that I'm about to present to you guys, it's about sex trafficking. So it's going to be issues related to the exploitation, the coercion, and abuse. So the content is intended for you guys for awareness, education, and prevention, but the material can be emotionally difficult and upsetting. So at any time, if you're uncomfortable, please step away, pause. You also have the ability to, I think, download this presentation ahead of time so you can kind of see what to expect ahead of time. So we just want to be sensitive to that. So feel free to just understand that this is a serious topic, and we are going to be I will be talking about some heavier issues. So I just want you to be aware of that ahead of time. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to focus on defining human trafficking, understanding. I'm not really going to talk about labor trafficking with you guys. I'm going to really, the focus is going to be on sex trafficking. So I'm going to highlight the laws. We're going to talk about different red flags and indicators as it relates to victims. And then I also want to kind of highlight the sex trafficking business model. And then, obviously you all are the experts when it comes to financial instruments and the channels that are used for money laundering. But I'm going to highlight to you what instruments that I have observed and seen. And then also I want to take it down to like indicators at the level of at different account level indicators. And then just kind of talk about just the basic framework for, evaluating suspicious financial activities. Next.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Chris. Now, before we dive in too deep here, we do kind of want to get a base level understanding for what the level of the familiarity is with our audience here on the call today. So we do have our first poll question up on the screen, and that's asking, have you filed a SAR about potential human trafficking activity in the past? Your response is going to be yes, maybe you've done it repeatedly, maybe you have, but just one time, maybe you haven't, or maybe you're just not entirely sure if that's something that your institution has dealt with. So we'll give y'all just a couple of seconds here to get these responses in before we take a look at the level of knowledge our audience has. Excellent. All right, we'll turn those around. I think we should be seeing those results up on the screen. Looks like we had the majority, 39% of folks said no, they have never filed a SAR around human trafficking activity. Looks like 45% have, but only 17% of those folks have only done it once. and then 16% are kind of on that I'm not sure perspective. Chris, how does this kind of stack up to what you were expecting to see?
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I would have thought maybe there had been some more, but it reassures me that, hey, we're doing the right thing here by having this presentation, because because the goal for me, honestly, is that I give you the information that we can increase that number. We can increase the number of SARs being recorded specifically for trafficking, and then that'll help bring more light to this topic and this issue.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that, Chris. We can go ahead and close that out, and let's dive into a little bit of background about what is human trafficking.
All right. So ultimately, I always like to ask this. I know, obviously, just think in your mind, like, what do you guys define and think of human trafficking? Well, a lot of it is associated with what we see in the media, right? What we see in the movies. And so a lot of things that it shows in the movies, it may be interesting movies, but the reality of it is not correct. I can tell you that a lot of these movies you see, like Taken, less than 1%, I would say, there's no clear statistics, but I would define that less than 1% of trafficking occurs as an abduction type scenario. Sadly, what we're going to see is the most common forms of trafficking are going to be what we define as pimp controlled and familial trafficking. So I can say that this is where the topic gets really sad, and it's kind of a little surprising, because you can't imagine, a father who is forcing his teenage daughter to have sex with other men on the weekends while she goes to school during the week. Or think about a single mom who meets a man who she believes loves her, and then, at a certain time they start to date, they come together, and then next thing you know, he's telling her, if you want to still live here and me support you, you have to go out and have sex with other men for money. Or a Chinese woman who comes to the United States to make money for her family to send it back to China, and then in the midst of it takes a job at a massage business, and next thing you know, she's having to be coerced into performing commercial sex acts in this business. That is a more realistic picture of trafficking. They don't show that in the movies. I don't know if that would sell, right? Because of how abhorrent it is. It's a horrific thing to think of. So, needless to say, that I would define as a more realistic picture of trafficking. Next slide, please. So when we start talking about trafficking, first of all, we want to identify it, right? So what is it? So human trafficking is the buying, selling, or trading of human beings for labor or sex. These four components is what makes it up. So victims of trafficking are exploited for commercial sex, labor, or criminal purposes. Traffickers will use many techniques: force, fraud, and coercion. You're going to hear me say force, fraud, and coercion a lot during this webinar. And the reason I'll say that is because those are terms directly utilized out of the federal statutes when you look at prosecuting trafficking. So, but those are like the three components that you have to have, or you need to show one of those. And then the common factors in all these cases is vulnerability and exploitation. So we're going to dive more into that here in a minute. Next, please. So this is the different types, and we're going to really focus more on the sexual exploitation. But just know that human trafficking you have all these different categories. Sexual exploitation, which is focused on taking advantage of another person through the abuse of power and vulnerability for a sexual gain, right? Forced labor, same thing, compelling a person to provide labor services through the force, fraud, and coercion. The domestic servitude, same thing, except it's for more private households. And then other forced criminal activities, you'll see it where a lot of times, not only will they be doing sexual exploitation, but they'll engage the victims in other criminal activities. We find that to happen quite a bit, whether it be selling drugs along with prostitution, or if it's pickpocketing, general crime type things. Organ harvesting, that's a rarity. I have not worked that. I know that is a whole different ball game when it comes to a presentation. I haven't seen it, but I do know it's out there. And but because sadly enough, people that can be exploited for their organs, the amount of money that it involves is pretty significant. But we won't talk about that. And then Benefits trafficking, I think a lot of times you see that when it comes to disabled individuals or people with mental disabilities that are taken advantage of and exploited for their benefits. Like we identify like SNAP benefits as an example. That would be something that's exploitable. I like to show this slide because I like to show the scale, right? Because everybody thinks, man, what is the scale of this? And honestly, the studies have shown $236 billion of global profits. And then also in 2023, it confirmed and identified, this is through the trafficking hotline, 133,943 confirmed and identified trafficking victims worldwide. That to me is amazing to see. Now, just so you know, the stats, they're always delayed, just so everyone knows. So I would love to provide more current stats, but especially international statistics they're delayed in getting newer ones. So we probably won't see the 25 stats until, probably next year, or even the 24 stats. So this again is just scale, right? To show you why these traffickers do what they do. I mean, when you sit there and look at how much they take in, 236 billion. I mean, that's a lot more. I mean, look at it, over twice Apple, Microsoft, and Berkshire Hathaway. I mean, it's insane. And so just to break that down, we did 236 billion as it relates to trafficking. But if you break that down, 173 billion is associated to sex trafficking, whereas 63 billion is associated to labor trafficking. Next slide. So let's talk about some facts, right? We'll talk about, let's see here. Okay, so the question we want to ask ourselves, why is human trafficking the fastest growing crime, especially following drug trafficking in the US? Well, it's a lot of different reasons, and I'm going to focus on a couple. Number one, the reuse of humans versus resupply of drugs. All right, this basically is kind of appalling, right? They're a human being. How are they? But they're objectified to the point as if they're a product, and that product is reusable to traffickers. So that is one of the main reasons, especially like cartels are moving toward a lot more human trafficking because of the fact that when it comes to drugs, if you have cocaine, you have fentanyl, whatever the drug of choice that you're selling, that runs out. You can only sell so much of it before you have to be resupplied. That with a human being, that doesn't have to happen. Transportation. Let's think about this. So when you are to have a supply chain, because every business has a supply chain, when you have a supply chain, you have to move cocaine, methamphetamine, or fentanyl. That in and of itself is illegal. So if an individual is caught with that, automatically, if you look at it from the police officer standpoint, let's just say the state trooper that is patrolling the highways and they do a traffic stop and you're caught with cocaine in your car in plain view, in and of itself, it's illegal. You're going to go to jail for a long time. But if you have a person in that car, is it immediately apparent that they're a trafficking victim? Not at all. And so that in and of itself, moving individuals is a little bit easier. Yeah, you have to feed them and you have to, somewhat take care of them, but that's where they're mistreated. And that's where the horrific nature of it is. But that's one of the other aspects of the supply chain when it comes to moving people. It's less of a risk. And then when we talk about the crime, it's difficult for law enforcement to detect. All right, so what do I mean by that? When we start talking about consent, a lot of times, especially in law enforcement circles, sometimes when you have an individual, most victims, and we'll talk about this further, but most victims don't identify themselves as a trafficking victim. And so through what we're going to discuss further is how they are manipulated and coerced through duress. They take these actions, and sometimes it could appear as if they consented, but really duress is not true consent. So, and then finally, they glorify it in the culture. I like to highlight some movies that are out there. I mean, these are dated. I'm probably dating myself here because I'm old. But like Deuce Bigalow, Pretty Woman, Hustle Flow, that Iceberg Slim. I don't know. That was an older movie in 2012. But all these movies, I mean, are kind of common, I guess, popular type movies, but really they kind of glorify that culture. They either mock or make fun of it or kind of like add humor to it to make it look where it's not as egregious as it really is. So I think that's a lot of the reasons why trafficking has been growing. It's one of the fastest growing crimes. All right, so now what? We want to go ahead and talk to you quickly about laws. I'm not a lawyer, but I do want to highlight, because as an investigator, what do, right? You have elements of a crime that you always have to show. So how that relates to you all, you help show those elements, right? By you doing your jobs and providing like solid SARs, suspicious activity reports. By doing that, giving indicators that you see and giving factual things that police can follow up on, that is so significant. And by you doing that, you can help open up a lot of cases potentially. So, but anyway, with that said, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, that was pretty significant. That was milestone legislation because it established human trafficking as it related to offenses at the federal level. And it actually defined sex trafficking as a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, and coercion, or in which the person's induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. So basically what that means is you have to show the force, fraud, or coercion with adults. But if a minor that is under 18 years of age is engaged in commercial sex, you do not have to show that. Therefore, it's automatic. It's automatic sex trafficking if a minor is engaged in commercial sex. So that is one thing that differentiates like an adult versus a minor. And then, of course, labor trafficking, I'll read it, but it's ultimately the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provisions, obtaining a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, and coercion for the purposes of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. So ultimately, it's a good example of that would be, say, a foreign national comes to the U.S. to assist to get a job. They take that individual's passport. Let's say if it's somebody in the agricultural business, and so they're there to help work in the fields to help pull crops. You know, a company could get them to come in, take their passport, make them stay in a home with other people, and they're not necessarily free to leave, and they don't give them money, or they charge them for the room and board. That's in the charging of that is so high they can never get out of debt. So that's the debt bondage aspect of it. So anyway, next slide, please. Okay, so this is just some of the laws, right? Like, I'm just going to tell you all this. The way law enforcement works is, the fact is that, yes, we have these established laws on the books, and you have to prove the elements of these crimes. But law enforcement is subjective in the sense that they can change the law or not change the law. What they'll do is they'll build their case, because the case is built on facts, not subjectiveness, but facts. And whatever facts, whatever law those facts can support and violations that those facts can prove and elements, then that's what we'll do and charge. But these are some common ones that I like to highlight. So I'm just going to talk about like 1591. That's a sex trafficking one. So ultimately, that's the violation where there's force, fraud, or coercion into commercial sex acts, unless it's a minor, and then you don't have to show that. That's like a 15-year to life penalty for that charge. When we talk about the 18 U.S. Code 2421, that particular statute, it really focuses on knowingly transporting any person across state lines intentionally with the intent for that person to engage in prostitution or sexual activity. So that is a good statute that I've seen commonly used, as well as the same thing for 18 U.S. Code 2423, which that is the same thing. It's illegal to transport a minor across state lines or internationally for commercial sex. Next slide. And so, all right, the next question I always like to answer, right, as we progress, where do we see this, right? Where is this? And so this is where the phase is of like, where are we going to see this? Because it's out there, we know, but sometimes we kind of put the blinders on and we don't necessarily see it. So we're going to talk about each of these individually. So next slide, please. Okay, so this particular thing, escort services, street prostitution. This is common. In a lot of high crime areas, it exists. In a lot of not so high crime areas, it exists. I can tell you that you'll see it in every city in this country. Now, whether or not a city wants to acknowledge it or not, that's different. That's a different story. But I can tell you that like the type of street prostitution escort services is usually focused on pimp controlled trafficking. That's what we call it. I have a good story for you. We had a victim, or not a good story. I mean, she is a survivor now, but a lot of times you sit there and think, well, you know, you're going to see the prostitutes walking up and down the streets. Not so much anymore. Like a good example is we had a victim who was in Kentucky. She was able to escape her. It was a domestic violence situation as well as a trafficking situation because her fiance had abused her and had also forced her to have commercial sex with others. She evaded him, got to Raleigh, North Carolina. And that's where I had encountered her. Ultimately, she reached out because she was homeless. She had no money, but she came to Raleigh because when she was a child, she was able to come here one time and she just liked the city, felt safe to get here. And so ultimately, but she was homeless. She was at a McDonald's of all places. And next thing you know, she's approached by a female, and a large group of individuals had come into the McDonald's. They saw her by herself. She kind of looked to be homeless because the way she had appeared. And so they approached her, the female approached her and said, hey, you want to make some money? It looks like you need some help. So she takes her up on it. And so that entourage of individuals goes to this motel down the street. And the two men that were with them, they were drug dealers. They go to one room. She and the woman go to another room. And then next thing you know, the woman wants her to start taking photos of herself naked. And say, hey, girl, you got to start taking some pictures here so we can start posting some ads. Because the way the street prostitution happens now with technology is that you take pictures of yourself, you post them, and then ultimately you have a conversation online with the individuals that want to connect, and then they come to the motel, and then they'll engage in the commercial sex, and then that happens for a few days, and then the entourage moves on to another hotel. And so luckily she was able to leave that environment. She didn't want to post things of herself naked. So she ultimately left and then reached out to a shelter who ultimately reached out to us. And so the good thing is that we got her help, and I collected a lot of the intelligence about that specific criminal group in Raleigh and passed that information on to the detectives that works the street crimes there. And, and that was a positive, So I'm just saying that when we define escort services and street prostitution, it's not necessarily up and down the street. You're going to see the women walking, or even men too, because it does happen with men as well. So next slide, please. This, another location you're going to see this is going to be illicit massage businesses. Now, I'm going to tell you, the pictures that you're looking at is actually from investigations that I've run. Where we've gone into, I have a collaborative where I work with in the state of North Carolina. We have investigators that actually work for the massage board. So it's an actual regulatory board that licenses all the different massage businesses in the state. And so I've started to go with them on these different inspections because of this is what they've kind of encountered. And what they're seeing a lot of them are foreign nationals that don't speak English. A lot of them don't know where they are from. What we've identified is the fact that they come from Flushing, New York. A lot of these women do, the majority, quite honestly, in these different businesses. And what they'll do is they come down here to get jobs and to work. And then what's happening is that then they have their passports taken, or they get manipulated into working in these businesses, thinking that there's no sex associated with it. And then they're coerced into committing sex acts because if they want to work and make money, then it's ultimately a situation where they say, you've got to do this or you just won't work and you won't make any money. These poor women don't even know where they are half the time when we try to engage with them. So that is another area where you will see sex trafficking. Next slide. And then this is the online aspect of it. Now, this is where we could have a full presentation about our youth and our children and the minors that are associated online. This is the predominant way, I'm going to say, how our youth are groomed. and engaged in sex trafficking. It's multifaceted, quite honestly. So when I talk about the IMBs that we just talked about in the previous slide, a couple of these sites like Rug Maps, Skip the Games, those sites actually rate reviews about commercial sex that occurs at different massage businesses. So you're going to see it there, right? And that's how it's communicated. That's how it's kind of spread. You're also, with all the different like Instagram, Snapchat, and all the different social media platforms that are out there, you're also going to see this is where adults will engage with our juveniles, with our kids. And what they'll do is they'll try to exploit lonely kids. They'll exploit whatever aspect they can exploit of a child, of a kid, and then they'll pretend and they'll groom them. And then at that point, that's when we call it sextortion, is where they'll engage as if you may have a 31-year-old male who's talking to a 15-year-old female and is pretending himself to be 15 years old. And then he says, hey, they'll basically coerce her into, or manipulate her into providing a picture of herself, maybe naked or topless, or they'll start really slowly, maybe in like some lingerie. And then they'll go from that to maybe, okay, what about a picture of yourself? And then after that is sent, then they exploit and use that picture as blackmail to these poor kids. So if you'll go to the next slide for me, Ethan, please. That is, that's what we would define as grooming and sextortion is what that is. So I have an example of this one. This was a case in Iowa, and this was a situation where it was a 17-year-old girl. She was a foster child, and she ultimately, she obviously had her different issues as a foster child with her foster parents, but ultimately she got online and she started talking to this Hispanic male. And in September of 2025, he came down and actually got her. They met. She ran away. They met up, and then ultimately he went from Iowa and he took her all the way up to Wyoming in hopes of getting to Sturgis. Sturgis is like a well-known, I guess, motorcycle venue. And so the goal for the trafficker, we think and believe, was that he was trying to groom her and then basically push her out at Sturgis for prostitution. And so he had made it all the way to Wyoming. And luckily, the foster parents had reached out to our organization, and our investigator had actually started working with them to start analyzing her social media. As by doing that, they were actually able to get indicators and locations of where she was. And they were able to, we relayed that to the law enforcement in Wyoming. And luckily, they were actually able to find her in that one town. And that was, it was a win in the sense that they were able to get her back. And then they had actually charged that man with sexual exploitation of a child. And so that's what he's facing. So he's sitting in jail right now, sitting in jail right now, awaiting or facing those charges. So the win there was the fact that they were able to engage and prevent that next step, that next phase. And so anyway, I'd like to highlight that as also a win that we see. I mean, it's always a lose in the sense that anytime that these kids are engaged and work, and groomed online, but these are the things and the reasons why you have to monitor your kids' social media. You really need to be engaged in that. That's going to be a different class altogether. But anyway, I just like to bring that in as well. But this is where you would see that. We've already kind of I know I've already kind of talked about sextortion. This is just the definition and how it's defined. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, so what I would say next is like, okay, why? Why? What are these unmet needs? So we utilize Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like done in 43, I think is when it was developed, and it basically describes human motivation. And so these are the things we all, what I always like to say is this: you need to ask yourself, what are your needs, right? What is something that because we all have them, right? We all have different needs and we all have unmet needs. The question you have to ask yourself is, are they exploitable? And that's what these traffickers do. They exploit that. And so that's exactly what happens there. So next slide, please. And so again, I'm gonna start listing off like who's being targeted. And so the way you need to think of this is this way. The people that are being targeted have that unmet need, whether it be financial, whether it be emotional, whether it be just the need for love in their life. So that's how you need to look at it. These are the people that are targeted. So homeless, runaways, people with histories of abuse, the youth, people with mental health or emotional conditions, those that are in the foster care system because of the unmet needs that they have related to, family, undocumented aliens, and even, every family has it. Next slide. So I just like to highlight a few of these stats. Ultimately, 76% of trafficking victims are 76% of trafficking victims with underage females comprise 17% of that. That's crazy. But I also like to highlight this: the trafficking estimate of that it's how much money? $225,000 to $250,000 annually, and that these illicit massage businesses make $400,000 to $800,000 annually. That's crazy to me. Next slide. Again, force, fraud, and coercion. These are different aspects of force, fraud, and coercion that these individuals will utilize, right? It's not a situation where it's not one size fits all. They utilize interchangeably. So you may entice somebody by fraud, with a romance, and then after you get them to be a part of it, then you physically abuse them to keep them committing the commercial sex, or you utilize other people or money to coerce them. Next slide.
All right, that should bring us to our next poll question, which is popping up on your screen now. And we want to know if you have used SARs, maybe you've contacted law enforcement directly, or had some kind of other input to try and aid a human trafficking investigation. Is that something where you've actually seen that come to fruition? Has it been used to help that human trafficking investigation? Can answer, yes, we have. Maybe you've reported something and you think it might have helped, but you're not quite sure. We're not entirely sure where it went. Totally valid option. Maybe no, maybe again, you're just not quite sure. Give you all just a couple more seconds to get those responses in. Excellent. All right, well, Chris, I'm sure this isn't super surprising based on our first poll question. 42% of our audience, which I think was very similar to that initial poll response, they've just never reported human trafficking activity. But for the folks that have, 6% of our audience says yes, they've submitted some of that information. Maybe they filed a SAR and they have been able to aid that investigation. Versus 36%, they just haven't been able to get confirmation that they've been able to aid. How does that kind of stack up to what you were expecting to see, Chris?
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Is it regarding like reporting it but not getting feedback from law enforcement? That is a challenge that we all face, especially if we're not in law enforcement. But that's interesting numbers. So thank you for sharing that, guys. All right, so next we're going to get into the indicators of victims, right? So again, we talked about those needs, and so a lot of signs that you're going to see are people that have been abused, malnourished, have been physically abused. So traffickers don't discriminate based on their gender, race, or socioeconomic. They're basically focused on who they can exploit, and that's something that they focus on. So there's no exact mold for a victim. It's just at-risk groups are a lot higher to be susceptible to trafficking because of that unmet need that they face. Next slide. So I just want to highlight these indicators. I'm just going to quickly see, avoiding eye contact, social interaction, their clothing being inappropriate or sexually inappropriate, over sexual for the age that they are, the inability to speak for oneself because of the control that they're under. So these are all aspects of indicators that you could see. Next slide. Person seems fearful, submissive, appearing malnourished, the signs of abuse. Does the person have abuses at various stages of healing? Untreated sexually transmitted diseases. A lot of nurses, we do these for a lot of emergency rooms and medical personnel. We do these briefings to kind of highlight that. Tattoos and branding. Sadly, that happens quite a bit where these traffickers will brand their trafficking victims just as a sign of control. Next slide. So this is just an example of an actual victim who did have brandings on her body. Next slide. So again, this isn't all encompassing, but these are aspects of indicators that you will see. We've already touched on a lot of these, but basically silent or afraid to speak. They could be even hostile or strange, have odd behavior because of whatever situation they might be in. Substance abuse is used quite a bit. And then they may be unfamiliar with their surroundings, so they may not know where they are because they may be high on drugs that they were forced to take, or they could possibly just not know because of having to move around so much. So, but this is a good list right here. All right, so what I'm going to say is this next slide is going to be a video, and it's a survivor story, and I really want everybody to hear this. So if you can go ahead and play that, Ethan, thank you.
I was born and raised in a small town in Southern Oregon, and I was a good kid in school. I grew up in a normal middle-class family. I got great grades. I was really active in sports, and I even graduated a year early. I was accepted into Oregon State University, and I had my dorm room already assigned, and I was really excited to move up to Corvallis. But that summer I got pregnant by my boyfriend, and I had to make a real tough decision whether I was going to keep my baby and unenroll from university or get an abortion and keep it all a secret. And that was a really tough summer for me. After I had the baby, I had some friends that had gone up to U of O to go to college, and they had an extra room in one of their apartments. It was at that time that I met a boy or a guy who pretended to take interest in me. I really thought he liked me, and we got along really well. He was really funny and charming, and he had a nice car, and he always picked up the tab. He had nice clothes. He told me he was a record producer, that he had a band up in Portland, and that's why he frequently went out of town. There's a saying that says when you take a child by the hand, you take the mother by the heart. And I really think that's what happened for me, because I had this new little girl and this man who showed this desperate attention towards her, like he wanted to really help make this family that I really wanted for my daughter. And he invited me to move in with him after about 6 months of dating, and I was really excited. And I brought him down to Southern Oregon to meet my family, and everything seemed fine until we arrived in Las Vegas. He said we were moving there because that was the entertainment capital of the world, and being a record producer and having a band, that's where they were going to get the most gigs and the most jobs, and that's where his job was leading him. So I desperately wanted to go with him, to be with him, and to start this family that he promised me. He pulled up to an escort service, and he said, "This is how it works in Vegas. I've spent a lot of money to get you here. I put first and last on an apartment. I filled your fridge up with food, and you're gonna need to earn that money back." And I felt trapped. I felt like, how am I gonna get out of this? And you didn't know if you were gonna live or die. You didn't know what he was gonna do or what he was capable of, and so it was really scary. I can remember just running through the casino thinking, like, these people don't even have a clue what's going on. They're just, cha-ching, cha-ching, Las Vegas, yay! And they're doing all this stuff, and I'm running for my life. I'm running from a man that has forced me into doing things that I didn't want to do. When you have a trafficker that's waiting at home with your child and says, if you don't bring home $1,500, you're going to find your daughter out on the corner, I think I was probably more frightened to go home than I was to be in the room. Because if you got robbed, it was your fault for being stupid. If you got raped, it was your fault for not watching your back. Anything that happened to you was typically your fault, and you incurred more punishment for allowing those things to happen to you. So it made you always walk in fear of your trafficker.
Okay, folks, so we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to pick up the pace just a little. But ultimately, yeah, I wanted everybody to see that, because I think a survivor story, it's very impactful and it can mean a lot. So ultimately, what I want to say to this point, we now should understand. You should have a good understanding of trafficking, what the crime is, the difference between prostitution and sex trafficking. I can tell you this: commercial sex is commercial sex. The distinction that we say with prostitution is if there's no force, fraud, or coercion. So if an individual is a prostitute knowingly and willingly, that is not sex trafficking. But predominantly what we see is that, all sex trafficking is prostitution, but not necessarily all prostitution is sex trafficking. So that's your distinction. I think we have a better understanding of the victim and the trafficker's mindset. And now I just want to get a little bit into the indicators of transactions. It's going to be a laundry list. I'm just going to kind of go through. You guys have this and you're going to see this, so you can go back and refer to this all the time. The financial instruments and channels that are used by trafficking, like you guys are the experts in that. Not going to get into that. I can tell you this: what I've predominantly seen is cash, the prepaid cards, some of the different structuring, smurfing associated with it, and then the third-party apps. I know that crypto is something that is prevalent or more prevalent, but I haven't seen it to this point as far as, but in your larger organized crimes, you're going to see that more frequently. Next slide. So again, all these indicators, next slide, please. I just want to say all these indicators by themselves aren't indicative of trafficking, but culminate like a commonality and them at different times and putting them together is what makes it look that way. So when we start talking about examples of red flags, so this right here, this slide kind of highlights typical money laundering red flags, quite honestly. But really, the use of cash, multiple bank accounts and credit cards, deposits from no apparent source of business, like that's something. Next slide, please. I think this, we like to highlight this specifically. Like it's pretty much, hey, if a business customer who does not exhibit the normal patterns of expenditures for like payroll costs could be non-existent or extremely low. So if somebody is basically saying they own a business, they should have, the expenditures that go with that. So if they don't, that's suspicious, right? Same thing with the debit inconsistencies of a customer's expected activity. So, like the know your customer laws, you need to know your customer, right? And so when you have an idea of that they have if they say that they work retail as an example, but then you're seeing regular cash deposits to massage businesses and travel, that's not the typical thing, right? So things like that. And then obviously when we start talking about the cash deposits and wire transfers and efforts to avoid record keeping and stuff like that to evade the CTRs, like that's something too. Next slide, please. Again, you got the outbound wires with no apparent business or lawful purpose, cash deposits in areas where they don't reside or business. A good example of that, I had a male trafficker. He would go and have parties in New York and Miami. So what would you see with him? You would see that he lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, but then he would have a lot of different transactions in Miami as well as New York at different times, and they're very sporadic. So that would be indicative, right? The online escort services and advertising, that would be something. And then transactions that are inconsistent with expected activities, like payments for housing, lodging, and so forth. Next slide, please. Again, here's a listing. I won't go over all of it, but I think when you start to recognize it, having an understanding of trafficking, you're going to be like, oh, that makes sense. So like, the frequent traveling city to city, various hotel purchases, hotels that are close to highways, fast food, because they're not going to grocery stores and having dinners. They're doing quick meals that are easy and cheap. Gas stations, drugstores, lingerie, sex shops, that type of thing. Next slide. Car rentals, because this is all showing people that are transient, right? Animal hospital bills. I always get questions about that. The reason is because a lot of times people use pets as leverage and coercion. And so that is something you could think about and see. Medical bills, that's pretty apparent for injuries that they may sustain or abuse that they sustain. And then abortion clinic charges as well. Next slide. High volume of frequently cash deposits, multiple deposits that are around numbers, rapid movement of money. That's something, because a lot of times they may pay on these cash apps or they actually pay cash. That's something that I've seen. And the point-to-point transfers and immediate cash outs, that's very common as well. Next slide. The frequency of ATM withdrawals. The minimal information about knowing your customer, like that is something as well. And like I said, the frequent short-term lodging payments, I mean, that's pretty straightforward as well. I think really you're going to look at like the travel patterns makes a big difference, and not necessarily state to state, but within a city. If you have hotel purchases within the same city, that would be questionable as well. Next slide. All right, and then this is like if you were seeing them or interacting with them, these are for individuals that may have direct contact with customers. But yeah, signs of drug, alcohol abuse, referencing like showing, fear, making eye contact, showing aspects of being controlled, poor hygiene because they don't have a lot of money, and the fact is that their money's controlled. So that's why you may see that type of thing. And then extensive address histories, that's common as well because they're very transient. Next slide. What you're not going to see are your normal purchases. So think of yourself, think of what you pay for on a consistent basis, on a monthly basis. You're not going to typically see that because they're not living in a home, and they're not, they're transient, they're moving constantly, and you're just not going to see those type of transactions. Next slide. So again, don't rely on single indicators, and make sure you preserve your evidence. That is a very key factor. Build timelines with your transactions. I put in here, use trauma-informed lenses when you interact with potential victims. I do not recommend you guys dealing directly with victims. You really need to have additional training with it. But if you were to ever encounter someone that you suspected, you need to be very trauma-focused. You never want to re-traumatize anybody. You always want to just try to keep it to the facts and just do your observation if you're interacting with them. Same thing, and then escalate it to your investigative partners. Next slide.
Okay, excellent. That does bring us to a poll question, I believe, which comes up. We're curious if there are tools that y'all are leveraging today to help with these investigative processes. Maybe this is LexisNexis. Maybe this is just a simple Google search where you're punching that phone number in to see if those ads come back to y'all. I think that, yeah, we really want to understand, do you have access to databases or tools that you're able to leverage to help you conduct some of these investigative processes? Y'all are quick on the draw today, which we greatly appreciate. It does look like most of our team says yes, they do have tools and they're actively using them. Great to hear. 60% there. 12% are using them, just not that often. Only 20% don't have them. So great to hear that that's something that's being actively utilized.
Yeah,
Chris, I think we've got we got a case study here I'll let you dive into.
Got it. All right. So yeah, this is our last thing, guys. This is a hypothetical case study. So this is going to help try to build what I would think, for those who may not have written SARs before, help build your reasonable suspicion for SARs, or for a SAR related to trafficking. So, okay, let's just say this. You get an alert of repeated $9,900 cash deposits into multiple personal accounts. All right, that's a strange thing, right? Structuring. All right. So what would be your next step? All right, I would think you would want to reach out, maybe talk to when they open the account, maybe talk to the teller that opened the account or the bank employee that opened the account. And well, you do that. Next thing you know, you find out that this individual works in the entertainment industry and was with a woman who appeared to not speak, but who had tattoos that read "Daddy's Special Girl." Pretty big indicator, right? Possibly. All right, so then you do a little bit more deep dive. You do an analysis related to the phone number that they provided and the know your customer in their application, right? And sure enough, what you see is the phone number from across the accounts that they opened and ad listings related to escort sites and commercial sex advertisements. Boom, that right there, that's gold to an investigator. And then you start to see that the funds move through prepaid cards and then into small service businesses as you start analyzing the different transactions, right? Because that's how they're probably laundering their money. They're integrating the proceeds. So right there, those three key facts are solid gold for a SAR. So then the next step would be, obviously, what do you want to do? You want to organize all your facts. You want to document. Documentation is key, and making sure you do the preservation of your support documents and then generate that SAR and then report it to the appropriate law enforcement authority. Next slide. So again, I want to say thank you. You guys are the financial gatekeepers. Investigators need you. Unfortunately, the intel flow, the flow coming back to you about what is done in these investigations doesn't always happen. But just know that you are a benefit and that what you do makes a big difference. So I want to say thank you to that. Next slide, please. So ultimately, it's all about collaboration and prosecution. So please collaborate. Next slide. So this is going to be like who to call. So, hey, if you see or hear anything, obviously you probably all have your own protocols, but these are some contact numbers for Homeland Security. I would reach out to your state, local law enforcement task forces for trafficking. You have the National Human Trafficking Hotline here. That's a very good resource. And then obviously Hope for Justice. If you have anything, you call. My number's on the next slide. Please give that. And just know I want to say thank you. I know we're running short on time, but I just want to say thank you so much for your help. If you have questions, my phone number is on the slide deck that is going to be available to you, and call me anytime.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Chris. We do have a lot of questions that came in, so we'll use a couple minutes here before we wrap up. Before then, we do have one final poll question that's coming up on your screen. This is just giving y'all an opportunity to reach out to Risk Out, get in touch with us, follow up on any of these things that you might be interested with. So please let us know if that's something that you're interested in. And while we have this poll question up, Chris, we had a question, actually a couple questions kind of in line with that last slide that you showed, asking about additional resources. Particularly, are there resources about kind of maintaining that trauma-informed communication that you mentioned? We had a question about trainings to train tellers to be able to identify that on the front lines. Do you have any advice on that front?
Yeah, I mean, like our organization, we reached out and we do trainings for different financial institutions. We do it for other organizations as well. You're going to find that they're online. There's a large footprint. I mean, where you can find out online about trauma-informed approaches. But yeah, I would say our organization, and there's other nonprofits as well that exist. And now, obviously, too, reach out to your law enforcement. And if you have like a financial crimes task force that you're a part of, reach out to them. The law enforcement entities there can help you as well.
Excellent. Well said. Chris, let me also just say, in between all the questions that we've gotten, we've also gotten a lot of appreciation for you for sharing this information and for the work that you've done over your extensive law enforcement career. So I just wanted to pass along those kind words that we're seeing in the chat here as well. Chris, we did get a question asking, I know we talked about massage businesses. Are there other common fronts that we as bankers should be keeping an eye out for that might be appearing more commonly in human trafficking cases?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different businesses, because I think primarily the businesses that deal with cash, but I think when it comes to like the IMBs, a lot of times you find like nail salon or health and wellness services. I think they kind of go hand in hand. So what we're seeing is a lot of people will start a massage business, and then they also may have like a nail salon business separately, but may have been started by the same entity. And then they may funnel money into those things. That's a common one that I would say that we see a lot.
Excellent. Chris, I think we've got time for one final question, if you don't mind. We had, oh, excuse me. Looks like I got muted there for a moment. We had somebody ask if they should be keeping more of an eye out for the, pimp or business manager side of the house or the victim. Is there one that's more likely to come through and be identified in those transactions, either the perpetrator or the victim side?
I would think that from the financial aspect, it's going to be the trafficker. And then from the victim side, I think the victim likely like a teller may see more engagement with a victim because they may be with the trafficker as they come into the bank, because the control of the finances is always going to be with the trafficker.
Excellent. And we had this question, I think it goes hand in hand, that said, with the increasing prevalence of online banking, are there things that we should be looking out for when those traffickers aren't coming into the branch?
Yeah, I think, well, again, go back in the slide, and I apologize because I did run a little long. But I would look back at that slide deck, and I had different transactions when it comes to the point-to-point sales and the speed at which transactions occur. I think that's something to reiterate to everyone, is that when it comes to the point-to-point, where it's going into one account and then moved out or being withdrawn immediately, that's a key thing that I would watch out for, if that makes sense.
That's well said. Yeah, and just as a reminder, I know we got this question a couple times. We'll be sending out the slides, the recording, you name it. All of that will be hitting y'all's inbox first thing tomorrow morning. So we encourage you to continue to lean on those. We do also have, as one of the handouts for this session, Risk Out pulled together a human trafficking quick guide that you can leverage to help kind of guide your own financial institution and make sure that your program's up to snuff in kind of identifying these. Excellent, y'all. Well, I know that is all of the time that we have for today. I want to give a big, big thank you to our audience for joining, but even more so to Chris and to Hope for Justice for sharing your time and expertise with us. We know how important this work is. We know, yeah, we're grateful that you took some time during National Human Trafficking Prevention Month and came and shared your thoughts with us. So big, big thank you there, Chris. There is a post-webinar survey that will pop up when we close out with today's webinar. You can give us feedback on your thoughts from today's session. You can let us know if you'd like to get in touch afterwards. And of course, if there are any additional questions, we've got Chris's contact information here on the screen. Please don't hesitate to reach out. You can always reach us at riskout.com. We'd love to just say hi or be able to help you out in your financial crime fighting journey there. And we hope to see you all in our next webinar. Chris, thank you again. I can't thank you enough for what you've done today.
Thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you guys for what you do. Please keep it up.